Hi, and welcome to this live reading from Sweet Vengeance by Pamela Gibson, and this is presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Prologue. Rancho de las Reinas, Southern California, August 1846. Elena Santoro stowed her brother's British hunting rifle and glanced at the sky. Storm clouds had gathered while she'd hunted the bobcat that had ravaged the chickens at her family's ranch. Time to get back before the deluge soaked her and made the trail impassable. She shuddered, but not from the cold. A warning? A premonition? Old-timers would say, "Someone walked on your grave." She shrugged and mounted her horse. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Her stallion neighed and tossed his head at the sound. Unusual for the southern part of California in June. Gray clouds normally blanketed the area until the afternoon sun burned through, but not today. The smell of rain perfumed the air. Not unwelcome in the drought-plagued hills, but odd. Plodding her way back to the rancho, her hands tight on the reins, she finally emerged through a pass and stopped to view her family's hacienda. One-story adobe buildings were laid out in a square with a courtyard within. Neat rows of food crops nearby promised a bountiful harvest. Perhaps they could sell some of the excess to their neighbors this year. There were only 3 of them left at home now, herself, Mama, and Antoine, her younger brother. "Where are you, brother? You've been gone for weeks without a word." She rode quickly once the rain started, the horse bucking as lightning, followed by a booming clap of thunder, filled the sky with light and sound. She'd find Mama in her bed, hiding under the covers. Lately, Mama had given in to fanciful musings, insisting she'd seen things that weren't there, or demanding Elena take the gun outdoors to look for a devil dog or a shriveled woman called La Llorona, both part of Mexican folklore. Elena dismounted in the barn and handed the horse to Mateo. "Needs a rub down and a bucket of oats. Be careful. He's skittish today because of the thunder." "Si, senorita. I'll take care of him." The elderly ranch hand took him away. Sloshing through the mud, she finally reached one of the heavy wooden doors that led to the interior of the adobe complex. This entrance was through the rear of the house, where she stopped to remove her boots. Her head shot up at the distant sound of wailing. The sound seemed to come from the end of the wing where her brother's room was located. Dios. She hurried along the corridor and paused outside the open door. Mama sat in her chair, her hands covering her eyes, crying. A man she knew as Gordo, a friend of her brother's, stood with hat in hand while someone lay on the bed in front of Mama. "Senorita Elena, I am so sorry for your loss." Gordo lowered his eyes. Elena marched over to the bed and stifled a cry. The body of her brother, her dearest Antoine, lay in front of her mother. Pain crushed her chest and closed her throat. She opened her mouth to speak, brushing away the hot tears that threatened to spill from her eyes, but no sound came out. After a few harsh breaths, she found her voice. "Come, Mama, you need to go to bed." Elena signaled to the housemaid, who stood unmoving in the corner. "Take her." She forced herself to look at the body, not her brother, an empty shell of a man with a bullet hole in his chest. No, 2 holes, one large and messy, the other smaller, as if he'd been shot in the back. Old wounds, given the brown stains on what was left of his shirt. "What happened?" Elena asked, forcing her voice not to waver. She must be in control now, for Antoine, for Mama. "He found the place where they kept his fiancée," said Gordo. "A gunfight took place. Both he and the kidnapper were shot. Antoine got away. Carmelo and I found him the next day about a quarter of a mile away, hidden in a small cave." "He was alive then?" "Barely." Someone knocked at the door as a clap of thunder shook the house. Another servant entered. "Senor Yorba is here. As you weren't at home, the major domo thought he should be notified, and he came right away." "Shall I bring him in?" A wave of relief passed through her. Their closest neighbor, Senor Yorba, was a good man. He would know what to do. "Yes." Gordo inched toward the door. "Thank you for bringing my brother home. So he died honorably, trying to free his fiancée?" "No, senorita. I told your mother it was an accident to ease her grief, but there's more." Gordo twisted the brim of the hat in his hand. "He was murdered by one of the Americans, shot in the back." Elena clenched her fists until her nails bit into her flesh. She gritted her teeth and expelled the air in her lungs. Pigs. Murderers. She hated all of the do-gooder Americans who had recently conquered California, claiming to liberate the populace from Mexican oppressors based in faraway Mexico City. Ha! A flimsy excuse for wanting to take their land. Who did this? I need a name. I don't know, senorita. Carmelo was with your brother when he died. Perhaps he told him. I had gone to find water. Antoine was burning with fever. Senor Yorba strode through the open door and stood next to the bed. Gordo sidled out the bedroom door. We'll speak another time. Wait, where's Carmelo now? Gordo leaned to whisper in her ear. He helped me bring Antoine home, but he couldn't stay. He's on the run, wanted for some crime. If I see him, I'll tell him you need to speak to him. He scurried away. Why didn't Gordo stay? Senor Yorba would want to hear the details. Hopefully, Carmelo knew the name of the American pig who had done this. Elena forced herself to appear calm as she greeted her neighbor, while dark thoughts swirled in her brain. She would learn the name of her brother's murderer, and she would kill the blackguard, slowly, inch by inch, while he pleaded for his life. She was Elena Santoro, and she had lost the brother she'd sworn to protect. Vengeance may not be swift, but it would be sweet. Chapter 1. Rancho de las Ranas, January 1848. Elena withdrew a scented handkerchief from her pocket and discreetly dabbed at her eyes as she gazed around the room at the faces of her 4 sisters. Candlelight flickered on the walls of the sick room, creating a somber setting for the group gathered to pay their last respects to their mother. Elena. Mama's whispered pronouncement pierced the silence of the room. Responding to her eldest sister's nod, Elena moved to the side of the bed. Mama beckoned her closer. You promised to find the man who killed your brother. I shall, Mama. You know I've tried. And you will take his life as he took Antoine's? Yes, as soon as I'm given a name. Gasps of shock filled the air as loud as the wind gusts that rattled the windows. Elena did not look at her sisters, knowing what she'd see. They already considered her an aberration, a woman raised as a boy until the age of 12, when their brother, half her age, had been deemed ready to begin his manly lessons. Mama closed her eyes, her breath rattling in her throat, her voice rising. I will not rest in peace until my only son is avenged. Promise me again, Elena. Promise me you will not give up. You will learn his name and kill him. Elena stole a glance at her eldest sister, whose eyes were wide with disbelief. It shall be done. Thank you. She squeezed Elena's hand. Now go, all of you. I'm weary. Send the priest to me. They left the room in single file, some sniffling, others crying outright. Padre Lorenzo, who waited outside the door, went in. No one spoke until they reached the sala. That's preposterous, said Maria, tucking her handkerchief in the cuff of her sleeve. She asks too much. Louisa still sobbed. What did she mean? What can Elena do? What can any of us do? We're all mothers. And Alessia and Maria are grandmothers. We are not killers. Elena walked purposely to a table holding a crystal decanter and splashed wine into a pewter goblet. Taking a sip of the fine Spanish Rioja to give her courage, she faced the group. There is only one of us who has had the training to do this, and Mama knows it. Surely she didn't mean it, said Maria. Bringing someone to justice and murdering them are not the same thing. Elena sneered. Do you think the Americans have any interest in justice? Antoine was a Mexican patriot. He had men training to attack the garrison in Los Angeles. One of the gringos shot him in cold blood and left him to die. Clara put her arms around Elena. You are what, 8 and 20? You can still marry. You don't have to carry out this ridiculous wish of Mama's. And Alessia raised her hand palm out, calling for quiet. Learning of Antoine's murder was a shock. We all thought he was killed by a stray bullet while trying to rescue his fiancée. Elena discovered the truth from the men who found him. She paused, and her eyes bored into Elena's. Do you want to do this? You are the only one who is unmarried, the only one with the necessary skills, but do you have the pelotas? Because it will take cunning and nerve to do the deed and not be caught. And if you succeed, you will be committing a mortal sin. Elena stared at her sister, her back straight, hands on hips. Yes, she could do this. And soon she would learn the name of the coward who had shot him as he lay helpless. Carmelo Cesaro, who had been in jail for over a year, had been released, and she expected him momentarily. Anger had lived like a shard of glass in her heart from the day she'd learned of Antoine's fate. She'd waited for Carmelo to contact her, but he'd disappeared. Months later, she heard he was in jail in the pueblo of Los Angeles. When she tried to visit him, she was turned away. She'd even tried to bribe one of the American soldiers who had searched for Antoine's kidnapped fiancé, but he said he knew nothing. She fisted her hands, dropped her gaze from Indalicia's, and turned to face her other sisters. Deep in her soul, the one soon to be in mortal danger, she knew she would carry out her mother's wishes. They were her own, after all, and had intensified with every frustrated effort. If successful, the rest of her life could be spent in atonement, or she'd be dead. I will soon learn the name of the man who pulled the trigger. After that, pray for me. They buried their mother in the family cemetery 2 days later. No wake, no lavish funeral, which suited Elena just fine. Those in attendance were close family members and a few loyal servants and vaqueros from the ranch. Father Lorenzo conducted the burial service while the mourners made responses as required. When Mama was lowered into the ground, each family member dropped a handful of dirt on the wooden casket and silently walked toward the ranch house. Elena and her eldest sister remained to oversee the placement of the headstone. Mama had ordered it for herself 1 week after she'd learned Antoine was dead. Indalecia knelt and set a bouquet of daisies in front of the stone. Senor Yorba made an offer for the ranch when he heard Mama was ill. She arranged the flowers. Mama thought it was fair, but she wanted to wait until she knew your plans. Sell the acreage and most of the rancho's assets, but keep the house and a few hundred acres of land surrounding it. As I am unlikely to wed now, I will want to live here after I fulfill my promise to Mama. You don't have to do this, sister. I swore to avenge our brother. Mama's dead. It no longer matters. It does to me. Indalecia stood and pulled her cloak around her. A cold breeze stirred the branches of the oak trees that shaded the graves in the family burial ground. You made the promise to ease her passing, yes, but you cannot believe you have any kind of duty to kill a man. 2 nights ago, when I asked if you had the nerve, I was sure you'd say no, and we'd be done with it. Dios! You'll be putting yourself in danger, plus it is wrong. Is it? Mama once said you were smart enough to go away to school. She said you wanted to travel to England where they were opening schools to allow women to become medicos. What happened to you? Why are you intent on this madness? I've seen how gentle you are with wounded animals on the ranch. You've even helped old Zenaida tend to the sick. You're a natural healer, Elena. You aren't a killer. Elena kicked the dirt with her boot and studied the rocks she uncovered. You wouldn't understand. No, I suppose I wouldn't. I was engaged to be married when you were a baby. I admit I don't know you very well. Until the day our brother was born, you were the son of the house, Papa's wishes. She faced Elena. You were cheated. You were never allowed to have a normal life. Do you not want it? Elena's gaze drifted to another headstone, one carved with angels. Her brother's final resting place was close, as was the grave of their father and several siblings that had not survived infancy. She shuddered as her eyes focused on her father's grave. His final words to her, uttered in the field where she'd found him, scorched her memory. Look at me, Elena. You must be the one to care for Antoine now. See that he grows to manhood. I am giving you this solemn responsibility. He is fragile and will need you. Do not fail him. I'm counting on you. But she had failed. He'd been murdered, and his killer was likely still alive. She sighed and walked away from her sister. Elena, things are not always as they seem. You don't know what really happened to Antoine. You weren't there. The day may come when you will regret this. And Alessia stomped off, and when her footsteps faded, Elena knelt by her brother's grave. I will find the man who killed you. I will hunt him down and make sure he knows who is being avenged before he dies. She stood and brushed leaves off the wings of the stone angels that stood guard on either side of a marble cross. The monument was the most elaborate one in the Santoro family cemetery. The peaceful setting should calm her. It didn't. She was still as furious as she was when she'd learned he had not died honorably. Now, she must mourn her mother as well. Senorita Elena? She straightened and folded her arms in front of her. She'd been expecting the man who approached her, his scuffed boots dusty from the fresh dirt of the grave. When Carmelo had returned, she'd been surrounded by neighbors who'd come to offer condolences. She couldn't leave them, so she'd asked him to be one of the grave diggers and to remain afterwards so they could speak privately. Shall we sit on that bench? He asked. If you wish. She walked to the wooden bench she and her sisters had placed in the cemetery for Mama when she came to pray here. Carmelo stood in front of her, clenching his worn hat. She studied his face as she spoke. Carmelo was a bearded man with shifty eyes Elena had always found unsettling. But Antoine had laughed at her unease when she'd confided her discomfort in the man's presence. He's my number 2 man, an excellent vaquero, Antoine had boasted. He's completely trustworthy. Elena wasn't so sure. His time in jail had taken its toll. He was thinner, pale, and wore a perpetual frown. Now he was here, hat in hand, ready to answer her questions about her brother's death. I know Antoine was searching for his fiancée. That part is true, is it not? She asked. It is. He had tracked her to a meadow near the place where we brand the calves in spring. There was a gunfight, yes? There was. His betrothed had been kidnapped by Lance Granger, who was arrested by the American military. He spat. He was later let go. Gringos protect their own. There was a gunfight, and Granger and Antoine were both wounded? They were. Antoine got away. When the soldiers took Granger away, Gordo and I took off. When we learned they hadn't found Antoine, we came back and searched for him the next day. That's when he told me what happened. He hung his head. He died in my arms. If he didn't die of the wound inflicted by Granger, who did he say shot him in the back? Carmelo's eyes shifted away and seemed to focus on some object in the distance. Elena tapped her foot while she waited for him to answer her question. His voice lowered as if he didn't want anyone to hear what he had said except her. The man who killed him wasn't Granger. It was Sean Mitchell. Her breath caught. The horse trainer? A man she'd once admired, a man who'd spurned her when she'd tried to kiss him, a man who'd broken her heart just when she'd formed an attachment to him? Why would he kill Antoine? Carmelo smirked. He was an American spy.